Today's daf is Menachos daf Kuf Tes, and we will begin from the Mishnah on the top of daf Kuf Tes Omid Aleph. Talk to Mishnah. If somebody says that I am going to bring a carbon oila, yakri vena b'mikdash, he has an obligation to bring a carbon oila, and he has an obligation to bring that carbon oila in the Beis HaMikdash. Doesn't sound like such a chiddush. If, however, this person brought a carbon oila, and rather than bringing it in the Beis HaMikdash, he brought it in Beis Chanyoy, he brought it somewhere else. Lo yatsa. The halacha is he didn't fulfill his obligation at What happens if the person says that I want to bring a carbon oila, and he specifically said that he's going to bring it in Beis Chanyoy? There the halacha is yakri vena b'mikdash. Likatchila he should bring this oila in the Beis HaMikdash v'mikriva b'Beis Chanyoy. But b'di'evet, if he brought the oila not in the Beis HaMikdash, but rather in this other bias, Beis Chanyoy yatsa, he fulfilled his obligation. Shimon says no, that if he brought it in Beis Chanyoy, he did not fulfill his obligation. Already Nazir, if somebody's Mekabel Naziris, and we know that one of the halachas of a Nazir is that when he completed his Naziris, he had to bring 3 karbanos, an oila, a chatas, and a shlamim. The halach is Yigaleach b'mikdash. He has to bring the karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash. V'mgilach b'Beis Chanyoy. If, however, he brought the karbanos in Beis Chanyoy, again, not in the Beis HaMikdash, la yatsa, he didn't fulfill his Naziris. Already Nazir, she'egaleach b'Beis Chanyoy. If, however, he stipulated at the time that he took upon Nazirus that he's going to bring the karbanos not in the Beis HaMikdash but rather in Beis Chanyoy, then the halach is Yigalach b'mikdash. L'katchila he should still bring the karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash from Gilach b'Beis Chanyoy. If, however, he brought them in Beis Chanyoy, Yatza, he's Yatza. Again, Reb Shimon says, Ein zeh nazar, absolutely not. So the Mishnah at first glance seems to be saying something fascinating. Ha'omer harei olai oila. So obviously he has an obligation to bring a carbon oila. Where does he bring the oila? In the Beis HaMikdash. If, however, he brought it b'Beis Chanyoy, la yatsa. There is a time, however, where someone that says harei olai oila could fulfill his neder of bringing an oila by bringing it not in the Beis HaMikdash, rather in Beis Chanyoy. And that is if he says harei olai oila she'akri vena b'Beis Chanyoy. So what exactly was Beis Chanyoy? The Gemara number Beis is going to tell us hashtag the rest of the story. But for now, just to read the lashon of the Rambam in his Pirush HaMishnayos. The Rambam says that Shimon HaTzadik had a son whose name was Chanyoy. Chanyoy moved, as we'll see later, rather dramatically to Alexandria Shal Mitzrayim, Ubana Bayis ba Alexandria, Lashon HaRambam, Bitzuras Beis HaMikdash. He built a bayis that looked, says the Rambam, like the Beis HaMikdash. So there was another Beis HaMikdash. There was a Beis HaMikdash that was not in Yerushalayim, on Hara Moriah, on the Hara Bayis, but rather was in Alexandria Shal Mitzrayim. And that's the Beis Chanyoy that the Mishnah is referring to. So if the Mishnah, if someone says, Harei olai oila, you have to bring the oila in the Beis HaMikdash. You can't bring the oila in Beis Chanyoy. Stating that, if you said Harei olai oila, and you stipulate Sha'akri vena b'Beis Chanyoy, then the halacha is emikriva b'Beis Chanyoy yatsa. Now, at first glance, if somebody is going to say harei olai oila, and he's going to bring the oila in Beis Chanyoy, regardless of what exactly Beis Chanyoy was, we know it wasn't the Beis HaMikdash. And if it wasn't the Beis HaMikdash, then l'chura, this person that's bringing a carbon is going to be over the Isser, shchutei chutz, and halas chutz, and he's going to be chayiv kares. And the truth is that, as we'll see in the Gemara, that's true. The Gemara is not debating that. There's nothing to talk about. That if somebody brings this carbon oila in Beis Chanyoy, he's going to be chayiv kares. The Mishnah is looking at it more from the Hilchas Nedarim standpoint. This person said harei olai oila. So can I fulfill my neder of bringing a carbon oila by bringing it to Beis Chanyoy? It depends. If he said harei olai oila, then he can't fulfill it by bringing it to Beis Chanyoy. If he said harei olai oila she'akri vena b'Beis Chanyoy, then he could fulfill his neder by bringing it in Beis Chanyoy. But in terms of the Isser shchutei chutz halas chutz, of course, regardless of what Beis Chanyoy is, and we'll see it was machlokes Ramei and Rabbi Yehuda what exactly Beis Chanyoy was. But it doesn't matter as it relates to the halach of shchutei chutz, because the halach of shchutei chutz states that any single carbon, anything that's kachim, that's brought as a hakrava, any place outside of the Azara, one will be chayiv karas for. Either way, so the Mishnah said, harei olai oila, and he clearly stipulated, she'akri vena b'Beis Chanyoy, the halach is the katchila, of course, yakri vena b'mikdash, but the imikriva b'Beis Chanyoy, yatza, freak the Gemara, yatza, ha-miktal kat, how could he fulfill his neder by bringing this carbon oila and Beis Chanyoy? Being that Beis Chanyoy is not the Mokem HaMikdash, it doesn't Neder of Harei Oila mean that he's going to bring this as a carbon oila, and by bringing it to Beis Chanya, he just killed it. It's like shooting it. It's clearly not a fulfillment of Harei Oila. Rav Hamnuna said, Nasaka im Harei Oila, al Menachos leis chayev b'achar yusa. By this person saying that I'm going to bring the carbon oila to Beis Chanya, the way we look at it is as follows. He said Harei Oila, so he clearly has an obligation to bring an oila, but at the same time, he's also saying that lav dafka I want to have to bring this carbon oila kihilchasa. Meaning, it's as if he said that when it comes time to be mafresh the animal, if I'll bring it in the Beis HaMikdash, wonderful. But if I'll decide not to bring it in the Beis HaMikdash, then I shouldn't be chayav b'achrayis, and I shouldn't now have an obligation to be mafresh another carbon to fulfill my neder. So just like if somebody would say harezu oilo, so the halach is go lekatchila, bring this as a carbon oilo. If something happens to it, what's the difference between harei alai and harezu? Harezu, you wouldn't be chayav b'achrayis. So of course, the katchila was supposed to bring it, but if I didn't, then that's also fine. There's no obligation to replace this animal if something ever happened to it. So that's essentially the way we're metaretz dibure. We say that he said arei lai oila, so he has an obligation to bring a carbon oila. So definitely there is a chiyuv oila. But at the same time, if he brings it in Beis Chanya, he's not obligated to go now and bring another animal, because by saying sha'akrivena beveis Chanya, it's the equivalent thereof of saying that I'm not going to be chayav b'achrayas for this animal. Thus, by him bringing it in Beis Chanya, the animal is no longer alive. There is no more obligation of a re'el ayoyla. Amalei Rava said, but if that's the case, save it the Mishnah had two examples of this halacha. Two times where somebody can say hare'el to bring a carbon, bring it in Beis Chanya and to fulfill his neder. What was the second case? Hareini nazar shagalech Beis Chanya. If somebody says hareini nazar, and rather than me bringing my karbanos that I'll be obligated to bring when I complete my nazirus in the Beis HaMikdash, the person said he's going to bring it in Beis Chanya. So yigalech b'mikdash. Katchila certainly supposed to bring it in the Beis HaMikdash. If you brought the karbanos Beis Chanya, yatsa. Freit the Gemara, hachinami denasika omer hareini nazar al Menachos leis chayev b'achrayis karbanosov. The same kasha, right? How could he fulfill his obligation of bringing these karbanos in Beis Chanya if Beis Chanya is not the Makam HaMikdash? So what's Rav Hamnuna going to say? He's going to explain the Sefer of the Mishnah the same way he explained the Reish of the Mishnah. That when the person took upon himself the Nazirus, he says, I want to be a Nazir, and I'm going to be mafresh karbanos for my Nazirus the way every Nazir has to. But at the same time, if something happens to those karbanos, I don't want to be chayav b'achrayas. How could you do that? Once you're a nazir, you have a chiyuv to bring karbanos, and if you have a chiyuv to bring karbanos, you are chayav b'achrayas. The only way for you to now not be a nazir anymore is by bringing the karbanos. That's why if someone's makabel nazirus today, even though once upon a time stam nazirus was shloishim yain, but today if somebody says already nazir, he's going to be a nazir at bias kol tzedek b'meher b'meinu amen, because the only way to complete your nazirus is by bringing karbanos. So once this person said already nazir, if the way we understand it is he was makabel nazirus, he just doesn't want to be chayav b'achrayas on the karbanos. How's that possible? In the world of Arei Oila, so that's an abstract neder that you took upon yourself. I'm going to bring a carbon oila. Okay, so you could be Mekabel Oila with a Chiyav Achrayas, you could be Mekabel Oila without a Chiyav Achrayas. That's the difference between Arei Oila and Arei Zu. That's a Mishnah and Masechtas Megillah, the first parak. But a Nazir has to bring his karbanis. There's no way to not be a Nazir anymore if you didn't bring your karbanos. So there's no way to be metaretz that when he said areini nazar al menas sha'agaleach beveis chanya, that what he meant to say is that he won't be chayav b'achrayas on the karbanos naziros. Nazir kamadlei ma'aseh karbanos of leimaskash. Right? If he doesn't bring his karbanos, there's no way for him to not be a nazir anymore. Elama Rava said we have to say a whole different pshat of the Mishnah. Rav Hamnuna's pshat of the Mishnah doesn't work. What then is the pshat? How is it possible that if someone says arei oila shakrivena beveis chanya, he can fulfill his neder by bringing the oila in beis chanya? Or if someone said areini nazir sha'agaleach beveis chanya, he can fulfill and complete his naziros by bringing the karbanos in Beis Chanya. Beis Chanya is not the Beis HaMikdash. How could you fulfill your neder and your naziros by bringing a carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash? So Rava said a chiddush. Adam said this person who said that he's going to bring his karbanos in Beis Chanya clearly understood that you can't really bring a carbon in Beis Chanya. Rather, this person l'dayrin nischaven. In his mind, he wanted to bring a gift to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Amar, he said like this: Isagi beveis Chanya tarachna. He said, if I get around to go to the Beis HaMikdash, then Harei Elai Oila should mean a real carbon. If I don't get around to go to the Beis HaMikdash and I live in Egypt, so I'll go to Alexandria, it's a little bit more convenient to me. So then, rather than bringing a real carbon in the Beis HaMikdash, I'll give a gift to HaKadosh Baruch Hu by bringing this in Beis Chanyai. The point is, of course, a real Harei Elai Oila you can't satisfy by bringing an Oila in Beis Chanyai. What we're being mitaritz, this person is by saying that lav dafka he was makabel to bring a real carbon. What we know for sure he wants to do is to give a gift to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he's sort of saying Gilitz Dadim, Harei Elai Oila on the one hand, but then again, that lav dafka, it should be a real oila. So really, depending on what he ends up doing, it's going to be a gloy milsel mafrei. If he ends up bringing in the Beis HaMikdash, it's going to come out that this was a real oila, and we'll do shchita, kabbalah, lachas rika, etc. If, however, he doesn't go to the Beis HaMikdash and he brings it instead in Beis Chanyai, so then we're going to look at it as a regular gift. The reason he fulfilled his neder is because his neder was never necessarily a real oila. It was contingent. What was it contingent on? Depending on what he decides to do. The same is true with regards to the nazir. Nazir nami. We assume that all we know for sure is this person, he wants to take upon himself sigufim. He wants to be mitzar himself a little bit. L'shem shamayim. And Omar again, try to make it to the Beis HaMikdash. If I do, then this nazirus will be a real nazirus. If he never makes it to the Beis HaMikdash, so for 30 days he didn't drink wine, he didn't touch his hair, he wasn't metam of mesim. Then he went and he brought these 3 karbanos, these 3 animals in Beis Chanyai. He's not a nazir anymore because Igloi Milsa, if he brought the karbanos of Beis Chanyai, that he was never really makabel a real nazir. Rav Hamnuna Malach says the Gemara. Rav Hamnuna, who had explained the Mishnah differently, he understood the Mishnah that when a person says Harei Elai Oila Shakri Ben Beis Chanyai, that is makabel oila without achrayas. The kasha was that works for Harei Elai Oila, it doesn't work for Hareini Nazir. Says the Gemara, Rav Hamnuna is going to learn Hareini Nazir the way Rava learned Hareini Nazir. Nazir kidduka amrit. Nazir Hareini Nazir Shagalech Beis Chanyai. I agree with you, Rava. I understand that the same way you understand that. That this person is not necessarily being makabel Nazirus. He's saying either I'll be a Nazir if I could bring the karbanos to the Beis HaMikdash, or it's just going to be tsar ba'alma. But as it relates to oila, amanash le'eschai b'achri yusa ka'ama. So Rav Hamnuna maintained his position of how he explained the Mishnah with regards to the reisha of the Mishnah. He agreed with the way Rava explained the Mishnah in the Sefer of the Mishnah. So according to Rava, the Reisha and the Sefer of the Mishnah is consistent. According to Rav Hamnuna, Pshan in the Reisha and Pshan in the Sefer is different. Rabbi Yochanan, the great Amir Rabbi Yochanan, he understood the Mishnah like Rav Hamnuna. How do you know that? If somebody says and then he added the words and he ended up bringing it in Eretz Yisrael, Yatza, but at the same time, Zokt, Rabbi Yochanan v'anish kares. He's going to be chayiv kares. Why is this raya to Rav Hamnuna? Because the way Rav Hamnuna explained the Mishnah, Harei Elai Oila she'akri vena b'veis chanyai, was a regular Harei Elai Oila. He was mekabel to bring a carbon oila. And once he's mafresh the carbon, that animal is a regular oila. Now, at the same time, from a Hilchas Nedarim standpoint, he wasn't Mekabel Achrayas. So if he ends up bringing this oila outside of the Beis HaMikdash, he won't have to replace it. Because he clearly said, I'm not taking Achrayas on this. But at the same time, it was definitely an oila. It's for that reason he'll be chayiv kares for bringing this carbon oila outside of the Beis HaMikdash. According to Rava, however, when he said Harei Elai Oila she'akri vena b'veis chanyai, he wasn't necessarily makabel oila. What he was saying is that if I bring it in the Beis HaMikdash, then it should be an oila. If I don't bring it in the Beis HaMikdash, it should be doiraim ba'alma. So what happens now if he brings it outside of the Beis HaMikdash? Is he chayiv kares? No, because it's a gloy milsa that it was doiraim ba'alma. So from the fact that Rabbi Yochanan said Harei Elai Oila she'akri vena b'veis chanyai anush kares, that's a raya that Rabbi Yochanan held like Rav Hamnuna, not like Rav Tanya Nami Hachi, a Braisa, Harei Elai Oila she'akri vena b'midbar. If somebody says, I want to bring a carbon oila, and I'm going to bring it in the midbar. Rashi says, what does the midbar mean? Kasava, this person thinks, Mishon Mishkan Shahaya Sham Yehei Adayin HaMidbar Kadosh. Then maybe the midbar has Kedusha. So the Sugi Zashas, where the Kedusha Rishayna Kitchel L'Shaita V'Kitchel Asalavai, Kedusha Shniyas Kitchel L'Shaita V'Kitchel Asalavai, Kedusha Eretz Yisrael, Kedusha Yerushalayim, Kedusha Beis HaMikdash, the Rambam, Perek Vav Hilchos Beis Abchira. So this person, this is like a Shmaka Amaratzus, he thinks that maybe you have Kedusha Rishayna, Kitchel L'Shaita, Kitchel L'Asavava in the Midbar. Wow, he's going to go to the Midbar, and he's going to bring Karbanos. Then he ended up bringing in Devar Yarden, so the Allah is Yatza, V'anish Karas. He's going to be Chayiv Karas. So the Gemara understands that this person, Hare'elai Oyla Shakrivena B'Midbar, is similar to Hare'elai Oyla Shakrivena B'Veischanyai. I mean that the Brisa says Yatza V'anish Karas, so this is a Tanya Kavase to what Rav Amnuna said and to what Rav Yochanan said. Zok the Mishnah Vayta. More on the topic of Beis Chanyai. HaKohanim Sheshim Beis Chanyai, the Kohanim that did the Avodim Beis Chanyai. So again, what was Beis Chanyai? For now, the Rambam says it was a structure that was in Alexandria, Alexandria, Egypt, that was Betzuras Beis HaMikdash. It was an exact replica, says the Rambam, of the Beis HaMikdash. Now there were Kohanim, there were priests, unfortunately from Shevet Levi, that served in Beis Chanyai. Says the Mishnah, if a Kohen served in Beis Chanyai, it disqualifies him forever from serving in the Beis HaMikdash. And that's Pashut, a Kohen that served in a Beis Avodah Zarah, he certainly would not be allowed to serve in the Beis HaMikdash of Yerushalayim. The Gemara on Amud Beis is going to make the diak that it would seem clear from the Mishnah that as bad as Beis Chanyai was, it wasn't as bad as a Beis Avodah Zarah. Because if it was as bad as a Beis Avodah Zarah, what's the Ve'ein Tzarech Loim of the Davar Achas? It's the same thing. So you see from the Mishnah that Beis Chanyai had a little bit more merit, at the very least, than a regular pagan house of worship. So what exactly was Beis Chanyai? So we'll have to stay tuned. Either way, it says the Mishnah are not allowed to be mishamish in the Beis HaMikdash and Emar, and it's learned out from a pasuk. The pasuk says, Ach lo yalu kohanei habamois el mizbach Hashem b'Yerushalayim. The kohanim that worshipped and served bamois are not allowed to bring karbanos on the mizbech Hashem b'Yerushalayim. Ki im, the only thing they are allowed to do is achlu matzos b'soich achem. What they're allowed to do is they're allowed to eat matzos. Pashut the Menachos, says the Mishnah. Since what the pasuk is saying is that they were treated like kohanim that were balei mumen. They're allowed to eat matnas kuhuna, but at the same time v'lei makrivim. So the kohanei habamois had a halacha that lo yalu al mizbach Hashem b'Yerushalayim. At the same time, kim achlu matzos b'soich achem. What's the exact comparable to that? Who's a kohen that's not allowed to do the avodah, but at the same time is allowed to eat the matnas kahuna? That's of course a kohen b'amah. So any kohen that worshipped on a bama, whether it's Beis Chanyai or whether it's a Beis Avodah Zarah, says the Mishnah, was not allowed to do avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. Amar Rav Yehuda, kohen sheshachat avodas kechavim, karbani reach nechayach. Rav Yehuda said a geshmak halacha in light of us being at the finish line of learning Masechtas Zvachim and Menachos. A kohen that worshipped base in a Beis Avodah Zarah, but the particular avodah that he did was shchita. Says Rav Yehuda, Karbani Reich Nichayach. He's allowed to do avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. What's the reason for it? So he had a pasuk. I'm Rav Yitzchak Rav Dimi my car. Yana she yisharsu oisam lefnei gululeim v'hayu lebeis Yisrael lemichshol avoin al keina sasi yadei aleim nu Hashem alikim v'nasu avoinam v'ksiv basrei v'lo yikshu elai l'chayin li. So he learned it from a pasuk in Yecheskel. Pasuk in Yecheskel talks about these kohanim that worshipped in the Beis Avodah Zarah. Yana she yisharsu oisam lefnei gululeim. They were doing shirus. They were doing avodah for the Beis Avodah Zarah. V'hayu lebeis Yisrael lemichshol avoin al keina sasi yadei aleim nu Hashem alikim v'nasu avoin v'lo yikshu elai l'chayin li. So even if I forgive them, it doesn't matter, says the pasuk. I'll forgive them. Yeah, tshuvas, mechaper, and everything. But at the same time, says the pasuk, the Navi Yecheskel, that these kohanim who worshipped, they're not allowed to do avodah right now, says the Gemara. Shiros, Shchita, however, lav shirasu, and it's for that reason Rabbi Yehuda said that being that the makar, that a kohen that worships in the Beis Avodah Zarah is not allowed to do avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, is based on a pasuk that says Yana sheyusharsu oisam. Only if he did shirus. Shirus means avodah. The Gemara says shchita lav avodah. What does the Gemara say it? About 20 times in Masechtas Zvachim and Menachos. So being that shchita is lav avodah, therefore it doesn't fall into the category of yan asher yisharsu oisam lefnei geluleim. Thus Rabbi Yehuda said a phenomenal chiddush that even though the Mishnah says hakoyanim sheshimshu beveis chanyai, even lo yishamshu b'mikdash b'Yerushalayim, they ain't tzarich l'ayim l'davar achar, and it's based on a pasuk in Melachim Beis, and you find the same exact theme again in Yecheskel Mem Dalet. So you find this in Sefer Sefer Malachim in Yecheskel, it's a Mishnah. Aber sagt der Meir Rav Yehuda, I hold that a kohen that did shchita in a base Avodah Zarah, it would not disqualify him now from doing Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. And the reason this is such a big chiddush is because that's pashut, that even though shchita lav avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, but if somebody shechts an animal Avodah Zarah, he's a regular Ovid Avodah Zarah. The idea of shchita lav avodah is true in Avodah HaMikdash. It's not true when it comes to the laws of Avodah Zarah. In the world of Avodah Zarah, there's a lot of things that are considered Avodah Zarah that are not necessarily considered Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. Shchita is considered avoid. If someone does shchita to avoid the zara, the halach is his chayiv skilo. So even though this person was a regular ovid avoid the zara, it doesn't matter because the criteria for disqualification for a kohen that worshipped, that did avodah in a base avodah zarah is not did he do avodah zarah. There's no halacha that if someone's oived avodah zarah he can't do avodah in the base hamikdash. The halacha is that if somebody was a kohen and he did what we consider avodah in the base hamikdash to an avodah zarah, that disqualifies him. Zokt Rav Yehuda, being that shchita lav avodah, it's for that reason that kohen sheshachat avodas kechavim karbonoi reach nichayach. Zokt the Gemara, shogag bezriko. What happens if a kohen did avodah? He worshipped in a base Avodah Zarah, and he did zrika again for Avodah Zarah, but he did it b'shoig. If he did it b'mezid, that's the Mishnah. Hakayanim sheshimshu b'veischonyo lo yeshamshu b'mikdash b'Yerushalayim. Ve'ein tzarich loy meladavar achad. The question over here is not b'mezid that we know. The question is, what if he only did it b'shoig? Rav Nachman says karbon reich nichayach. Then it's okay. Rav Sheshes said ein karbon reich nichayach. So according to Rav Nachman, it's only b'mezid. According to Rav Sheshes, even he did it b'shoig. Rav Sheshes, no, I mean, how do I know even b'shoig? The pasuk says that pasuk in Yecheskel Perek Mem Daled that teaches us this halacha. Yana sheyisharsu oisam lefnei giluleya, that the kohanim that did avodah for avodah zarah are now let it do avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, said v'hayu lebeis Yisrael lemichshal avoin. It says michshal and it says avoin. What are these two things? Ma'ilab oy michshal oy avoin. Umichshal shoygei v'avoin mezid. Michshal is like you stumbled. It was a mistake. Avoin always means mezid. So if that's the case, the Mishnah says mefurish that even if he only did a b'shoygeg, even if it was only a michshal, even then he'll be disqualified from doing the avodah. Rav Nachman said that it's only if he did it b'mezid that he becomes disqualified. He did it b'shoygeg, not michshal de avin. It's not oy michshal oy avin. The way you read the pasuk was michshal de avin. The point is, it has to be avin. It has to be b'mezid. Rav Nachman, no, I mean Allah. What's my makar? So Rav Sheshes is makar that shogag bezrika ein karboni reich nechayach. The halacha the Mishnah would apply is from that pasuk in Yecheskel. The pasuk says, "V'hayu lebeis Yisrael michshal avayin, oy michshal oy avayin, michshal shogeg, avin is mezid." Rav Nachman argued. Rav Nachman said that no, shogag bizrikar kabani reich nechayach. What's his mikar? The Tanya learned it from a brisa. The pasuk says, and this is in Parsha Shlach, "V'chiper hakoyin ala nefesh hashogeges becheta." Bishgaga. The context over there is someone did an avera b'shoigig, an avera of avodah zarah, says the pasuk, v'chiper hakoyim ala nefesh hashogeges becheta. And from this pasuk, the brisa learns that a kohen who himself did avodah zarah b'shoigeg, he can bring his own carbon. Meaning, could a kohen bring a carbon for himself? So there's an idea of ein chavush mater atzmei b'beis ha'asurim, but pashit, and this is a brisa that addresses this question, a kohen can. And the context over here is avodah zarah, and clearly a kohen that did avodah zarah b'shoigeg, he can go ahead and bring his own carbon. What was the avodah zarah? Ilema b'shchita. Are we talking about where he did it b'shchita? Ma'ir yeshoigeg. Afilu mezanami. What's the chiddush? The chiddush is that even though he did avodah zarah b'shoigeg, still he's allowed to bring a carbon. Shchita, had he done even b'mezid, he'd be allowed to bring a carbon. That was Rabbi Yehuda's halacha. Rabbi Yehuda started off the sugya. Kohen sheshachat la'avodas kechavim kabon reich nechayach, because shchita lav avodah el lab is zrika. So we're probably talking about zrika. Oh, you see mefurish that even though we did zrika b'shoigeg, it doesn't matter. Still, it doesn't disqualify him from doing the avodah. I doesn't the Mishnah say kohanim sheshimshu b'veischonyo lo yishamshu b'mikdash ve'in tzarich loy meladavar achad. The Torah says, yeah, that's only if you did it b'mezid. But if you only did it b'shoigeg, it's going to be okay. From the fact that a kohen who did avodah zarah b'shoigeg can bring his own carbon. So you see clearly he's allowed to do avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. We're talking about zrika. That's what Rav Nachman thought. Either way, that would be Rav Sheshes. Now, really, the Bryce is talking about shchita. What was the kasha? What's the chiddush? If we're talking about shchita, even if the kohen would have done shchita b'mezid, he'd be allowed to do avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. So what's the chiddush that if he did shchita b'shoigig, that he's allowed to go and bring the carbon? Zok the Gemara. Really, it is a chiddush because even though Rav Yehuda did in fact say that kohen sheshachat la'avodas kechavim karboni reach nichayach, he only meant it, said Rav Sheshes, where he did the shchita b'shoigig. But if he did it b'mezid, loy nasim misharas la'avodas kechavim. Because although it's true that shchita la'avodah from a technical sense, but let's be honest, if somebody shechts an animal in a pagan house of worship for avodah zara, he's certainly facilitating shiras. So you're right, shchita technically speaking wasn't avodah zara, but you could have a machshavah shloi l'shmo when you do shchita. You could have a machshavah pidgul when you do shchita. According to Rashi, you need a klisharis when you do shchita, etc., etc., etc. The shchita is mekadesh the dam and the tzavra behema. So the shchita, although it's not an avodah, but at the same time it is some form of shiras l'avodah zara. So it's true that shchita l'avodah, but and it's for that reason if someone does shchita b'shoigig, he wouldn't be disqualified, said Rav Nachman. But if somebody does shchita b'mezid, he in fact, with also zok the Gemara, that this machlokes that emerged from the original machlokes. Again, the original machlokes when Rav Sheshes Rav Nachman was shagag b'zrika. If a kohen worshipped in a base of avodah zara, he did zrika, but he did it b'shoigig. Does he become disqualified from doing avodah in the Beis Hamikdash? According to Rav Nachman, karbon reich nechayich, he could do avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. According to Rav Sheshes, ain't karbon reich nechayich, he cannot do avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. What emerged was a derivative machlokes, and that is shchita b'mezid. What's the halacha? According to Rav Nachman, shchita b'mezid, being that shchita l'avodah, you don't become disqualified. According to Rav Sheshes, shchita b'mezid, you do become disqualified. So, they, in fact, Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes specifically argued about that second machlokes. The itmar hezid b'shchita. Rav Nachman over karbon reich nichayach. Rav Sheshes amar in karbon reich nichayach. Rav Nachman karbon reich nichayach. Why lo yavad shiros? It's not of shchita l'avodah. Rav Sheshes amar in karbon reich nichayach. Nasim misharas l'avodas kechavim. That even though you're right shchita l'avodah, but at the same time you are facilitating avodah zara. Amar Rav Nachman, how do I know that if somebody does shchita b'mezid, it's okay? The time we learned to the brayso, kohen shavat avodas kechavim, another brayso that discusses these halachas. A kohen that was over avodah zara, v'shav, and he did tshuva, karboni reich nichayach b'mar. So a kohen did avodah zara, he did tshuva, he can bring a carbon in the Beis Hamikdash. Ilem b'shoigeg. Are we talking about a kohen that did avodah zara b'shoigeg? My v'shav. So what's this lashon v'shav? V'shav means, now he did tshuva. Shav ha'imidu. He was never a bad person. He never really was a rasha. He just did it b'shoigeg. Ela pshita b'mezid. So Rav Nachman understood the Bryce is discussing a kohen that did avodah zara b'mezid. The ibis zrika. Now, what was the avodah zara? Was the avodah zara zrika? Kishav mahavi. Who cares if he did tshuva? Ha'avad l'shiras. The halacha the Mishnah that a kohen that does avodah zara in a base avodah zara can't do avodah now in the base of Mikdash, true, even if he does tshuva. So Elala, what is it talking about? Shchita. Must be talking about shchita. Rav Nachman says, you see clearly that shchita, even the mezid, is treated differently. Now, it is mashma from the brayso, the way Rav Nachman's understanding the brayso now, that the only time a kohen that shechted in a base avodah zara is allowed to do shchita or avodah in the base of Mikdash is if at the very least he did tshuva. But the bottom line is you see that if he did tshuva, shchita, even the mezid, is viewed differently than all the other avodas. Rav Sheshes, who said that shchita b'mezid, no, because nasim misharas l'avodas kechavim. How's he going to understand the price? The price is really talking about where he did it b'shoigig v'hachikam. What was the kash? If he did it b'shoigig, then what's the v'shav? He was never a balavera. What does it mean he did tshuva? In shav me'ikaroi d'chiyava b'shoigig avad kabban rech. Shav doesn't mean that after he did it he was v'shav. V'shav is more defining who he was at the time that he worshipped in the base of avodah zara. If he was a v'shav when he did it, kohen sha'avad avodas kechavim v'shav, not now he did tshuva as a second act, but at the time that he did the avodah, he was a shoigig. The halach is karbon reich nichayach v'mlav in karbon reich nichayach. So we have two machlokes in between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes regarding the halacha that a kohen that does avodah in a base of avodah zara, he is not allowed to do avodah in the base of mikdash. The first machlokes was if he did zrika, he did a real avodah, he did a b'shoigig. According to Rav Nachman, he could do avodah in the base of mikdash. According to Rav Sheshes, he cannot do avodah in the base of mikdash. The second was if he did shchita b'mezid. According to Rav Nachman, he could do a void in the Beis Hamikdash because shchita lav avoidi. According to Rav Sheshes, he cannot do a void in the Beis Hamikdash because at the end of the day, nasa misharis la avoidus kechavim. The Gemara now is going to bring two additional machlokes in between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes. Hishtachava la avoidus kechavim. What happens if somebody bows down to avodah zarah? Rav Nachman amar kabane reach nichayach. Rav Sheshes amar ein kabane reach nichayach. Again, Rav Nachman is the meko. He says his carbon is a reach nichayach. Rav Sheshes says not. What if he didn't do zrika, he didn't do shchita, he didn't even do a shtachava, but he took upon himself avodah zarah. He accepted it upon himself. Is that enough to disqualify him? Again, machlokes. Rav Nachman amar karban reich nichayach. Rav Sheshes amar ein karban reich nichayach. So the Gemara v'tzrich, you need all the machlokes. And Ashmin and Hachka Ma'isa. Had we only had the first, by he come Rav Sheshes b'shum davar l'shiros. Aval shchita d'lo yavar l'shiros. Had we only had the machlokes where he did zrika b'shaygig. So I would think, okay, over there, Rav Sheshes holds his halacha because at the end of the day he did zrika. It's true, he did it b'shaygig. Oh, you should have been more careful. At the end of the day, he did an act of zrika, a real act of avodah to avodah zarah. But shchita, which is lav avodah, maybe it's different. Maybe moedel the Rav Nachman yeshmin and shchita. And had we had the machlokes Rav Nachman Rav Sheshes, even by shchita, which is avodah avodah. At the end of the day, Rav Sheshes had a svara why even though shchita lav avodah, but still shchita, as much as it's not an avodah, it is an avodah. Nasim misharis avodah zarah. Avla shtachava, tli avodah avodah, shtachava, which is not an avodah at all. Emaloi tzricha. That's why Rav Sheshes had to say his halacha by shtachava as well. At the very least, he performed some sort of act. But if he just said Eliyata to the avodah zarah, that's already not even a maisa. It's a dibur ba'alma emaloi tzricha. Therefore, we needed a machlokes with Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes. In all four cases, exhale. So before we go weiter, so we have an interesting machlokes. Really, that begins with a Mishnah. Hakayhanim sheshimshu beveis chanyoy lo yishamshu b'mikdash of Yerushalayim. And then the Mishnah said the ain't tzarich loim, and that's pashut that if a kohen did avodah in a base avodah zarah, I mean a kohen was oived avodah zarah, the halacha is that he will not be able to do avodah in the base hamikdash. Now, believe it or not, this halacha is halacha l'maisa. So despite the fact that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash nowadays, but this is something that is very much halacha l'maisa. It's an Orach Chaim in Simin Kuf Chav Ches Sivkot and Lamed Zayin in the laws of Nesias Kapayim, Duchening. The Mechaber says, Mumr la'avodah zarah. If someone's an Oived avodah zarah, lo yisa es kapav. He's not allowed to duchen. So someone that's an Oived avodah zarah can't duchen. Yeshayimim shem asa tshuva noisa kapav. It's only a yeshayimim. That if he did tshuva, he's not an Oived avodah zarah anymore, he then would be allowed to duchen. The nenas, if he did the avodah zarah be'oines, even though you're not allowed to be Oived avodah zarah be'oines, it's one of the three averos that are Yahar Gavayaver, but at the same time, it's going to be, okay. So the Mechaber in Hilchos Tzias Kapayim says that if someone is a mummer l'avodah zarah, so the halacha is lo yisa es kapav. What's the reason? The reason is because duchenin is considered avodah. It's Reb Shimon's memra that we had earlier, way back in the beginning of Masechtas Menachos. Reb Shimon talked about 15 additional types of avodas, if you remember, and one of them he said was duchenin. In fact, the Magen Avraham brings that an oinen is not supposed to duchen. Why not? Because the Reb Shimon referred to Nesias Kapayim duchening as an avodah. An oinen, the Mishnah says, right in the beginning of the second paragraph of Masechtas Zvachim, was not allowed to do avodah. One of the psulim la avodah was just like a Balmum is not allowed to do avodah, an oinen is not allowed to do avodah either. So if duchening is avodah and an oinen is pasol avodah, an oinen wouldn't be allowed to duchen. In other words, duchening in halacha is treated like avodah. Says the Mechaber. If that's the case, someone that's a mumar avodah zara, lo yisa es kapav. What's the makar? The Beragoyla says Menachos nuntes. It's obviously typo. It's Menachos kuftes. It's the Mishnah that we just learned. Kayhanim sheshimshu beveis chanyoy lo yishamshu b'mikdash Yerushalayim. Then they ain't tzarich loim eladavaracha. So halacha l'maisa. If a kohen is an oived avodah zara, he's a mumr la'avodah salilim lo yisas kapav. Okay, maybe not so halacha l'maisa. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'cheinim hu mumr l'chal Shabbos b'far hesed. And I want you to know that this halacha is true even for someone that's a mumr l'chal Shabbos b'far hesed. He too is ko'ived gilulim. V'lo yisa es kapav, he too is not allowed to duchen. What's the pshat in the Mishnah Berurah? Pshat is, based on what the Gemara says, that if someone is mechalel Shabbos, it's keilu oived avodah zarah. We always speak out Rashi and Yavamas Daf Mem Chesam and Beis. Rashi says that a ger toishav, that's a Ben Noach that took it upon himself to observe the Shevet Mitzvahs Ben Noach, has to keep Shabbos. Why? Rashi says in Yavamis Memches, the reason is V'sira Yakosav ala Shabbos, the Mechalel as Shabbos ko'evet avodas kechavim, because the Mechalel Shabbos is like an ovet avodah zarah, and this is something that appears many places in the Chazal. The point is that if a mummer l'avodah zarah is not allowed to duchen, says the Mishnah Brura that a mummer l'chal Shabbos befar hesya harehu ka'avodas kilulim, and the halach is lo yisas kapov. So the Maisa, the Mishnah Brura says that if someone's a mechal Shabbos befar hesya, he's a kohen, he comes to shul, it's Yontif now, with Shani Yom Kippur, he wants to get up and he wants to duchen. Now let him duchen. Also, cannot duchen. Lo yisa is kappa. And the reason is based on two things. Number one, the fact that Nesias Kapayim is avoida. Number two, that Michal Shabbos is Ka'ovid Avodah Zarah. So it comes out that this person who's a Michal Shabbos, who really is now an Ovid Avodah Zarah, wants to do Avodah, and it's a Mishnah. Menachos Kuftes, and the Mishnah we just learned that someone that's an Ovid Avodah Zarah is not allowed to do Avodah. Stating that, there's a fascinating tshuva from Moshe Feinstein. It's a Igros Moshe Chelek Aleph, it's in Lamed Gimel. And the tshuva was written in 1950. It was addressed to Yedidi Harava Goyin HaMefursim, Reb Shlomo Yehuda Leib Alevi Levita and Shlita Hagayvid in Rock Island. Either way, the Shiloh was asked to him that he says, he knows there are kihilos where Mechalei Shabbos come and they want to duchen. And is it okay to allow them to duchen or not? So Moshe says like this, Hine, Michtav Bidvar Mechalei Shabbos for Hesel and Siyas Kavayim Kibalti. Umashla Hishafti, apparently this was the second time that he sent him to Shiloh. He said, I didn't respond the first time, something that I find very difficult to talk about. It's not clear why. Moshe said, when I got already the second letter, really, I don't want to answer you the second time either. But then I'm worried that maybe you're going to take it personally. This is Rav Moshe's midas, that even though he felt that it was difficult for him to talk about, but at the same time, the second Shiloh already, I'm not going to be mafter. I'm going to tell you what I think. Says Rav Moshe a davar nifla. Rav Moshe says, "V'hine midina afshe mechal Shabbos befar hesya hu kamum avodah zarah. Umitam zeh savri achroinim. The achroinim say the apostle and Nesias Kapayim. Ukedi isa b'Mishnah Brura sif katan kuf lamed dalet and simin kuf chav ches and erichaim. The Mishnah Brura that we just learned. Avol yesh lefak fake bazeh tuva." However, says Rav Moshe, I don't understand it. I don't understand the psak of the Mishnah Brura. And Rav Moshe says two things. The first thing that he says is that what's the premise of the Mishnah Brura? The premise of the Mishnah Brura is that a Mechal Shabbos is Ovid Avodah Zarah. An Ovid Avodah Zarah is not allowed to do Avodah. Duchening is Avodah. So, back to the envelope arithmetic, what you end up with is that someone that's a Mechal Shabbos is not going to be able to duchen. But says Ramesh, is that true that any person that's an Ovid Avodah Zarah in the times of the Beis HaMikdash was not allowed to do Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash? Sinish Temes. Ramesh says the whole machlokes between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes, one of the four machlokes that we just learned. If someone did shchita in a Beis Avodah Zarah, would that disqualify him from now doing Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash? Where Rav Nachman said no, Karbonei Reich Nichayach, even if he did the shchita b'mezid. Why? Because shchita lav avodah. And even Rav Sheshes that argued, what did Rav Sheshes say? Even though it's lav avodah, but you're facilitating. You're still a mishares. You can't tell me that it's mamish not an avodah. On some level it's an avodah. And that's why at the end of the day, but says Rav Moshe, I don't understand the shayla. If there's a halacha that any person that's oved avodah zara is now not allowed to do avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, then what's the shayla? If someone did shchita avodah zara, he was an oved avodah zara. Says Rav Moshe, it's clear, there's no other way to learn this Gemara other than walking away and saying that just because you're an Ovid Avodah Zarah does not mean you can't do Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. It's not true. What you see from the Gemara is that if somebody did Avodah to Avodah Zarah, he did Zrika, Kabbalah, Ilacha, Akdara, Nisuch. He did an Avodah Chashuva. That's when you have the halacha that he now can't do Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. So it says Ramesh, it's true, a Mechal Shabbos b'far Hesya is Kovet Avodah Zarah. But are you going to tell me that a Mechal Shabbos b'far Hesya is more than a Sheichit Avodah Zarah? It's true he's Kovet Avodah Zarah, but even someone who does Shchita Avodah Zarah, who's not Kovet Avodah Zarah, he is an Ovid Avodah Zarah, without the Kaf Adimyan. Even he, according to Rav Sheish, is allowed to do Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. And Rav Nachman has a Svarach Hitzoino why he's not allowed to. So it's Pashut, says Rav Moshe. He says it's Pashut Ad L'Ma'od. U'kemat Shalani is Daiti Zebor L'Dina, says Rav Moshe. Avshu Neged Das Rabbi Seinu Achreidim. Even though the Achreidim didn't pass in that way. But says Rav Moshe, I don't know what to do. It's so pasha to me. How in the world can you look at a Mechal Shabbos B'Farhesi any worse than someone who did Shchita L'Avodah Zarah? He's Koven Avodah Zarah. It just means he has the Chomer of Avodah Zarah. He didn't do Srika Avodah Zarah. So at the end of the day, he's an Ovid Avodah Zarah where he didn't physically worship in some pagan temple. The Medina, the Gemara, he's allowed to do Avodah now in the Beis HaMikdash. So if Ashteit Nishta the ganze Meisen, there Moshe says something unbelievable, which is actually a great segue to the beginning of Masechtas Chulin. It's more of a Chulin the Gesugya, so maybe we'll pick it up more then. But Moshe says that we know that the only time a Mechal Shabbos is viewed Ka'evet Avodah Zarah is if he's Mechal Shabbos B'Farhesya. But a Mechal Shabbos B'Tzin, if someone's Mechal Shabbos B'Chadri Chadarim, he's not Ke'ilu Ovet Avodah Zarah. It's only someone that's Mechal Shabbos B'Farhesya that's Ke'ilu Ovet Avodah Zarah. And Moshe says a svara why. At first glance, Moshe says it's really Hepech HaSvara, because you find that someone that does an Avera B'tzina is viewed more as a kaifer than someone that does an Avera B'Farhesi. Where do you see that? The Ganav and the Gazlan. The Ganav who steals when nobody's looking has to pay kefil. Rabbi Yochanan said in Perek Meruba, what's the reason? Because in his mind, he made all the cheshbainas. He checked off all the boxes. I don't want this one to know. I don't want that one to know. I want to look like a shiny yid over here. What about the Rebbe? He doesn't care about. So there's more an element of kfira when a person does an Avera B'tzina than there is when a person does an Avera B'Farhesi. So, I want to ask you a kasha. Everybody that ever learned the beginning of Masechtas Chulin knows that if someone's B'chal Shabbos B'Farhesya, he's mamish a koifer be'ikr, he's ki'ilu oived avodah zarah. If someone's B'chal Shabbos B'tzina, no. Frank Ramosha, in the world of kfir, I think it should be just the opposite. Someone that's B'chal Shabbos, he clearly is denying Ma'aseh Bereishis, and he's not doing a B'tzina. He's adding kfira al gabe kfira asay. Now you have the kfira perek meruba, as opposed to someone that only does it b'farhesya. So Ramesh says you have to say some sort of svara. And Ramesh is a shveris svara. Again, this is more for the beginning of Chulun, but what Ramesh seems to say is that it's when a person does a betzina, somehow we're going to touch up what he did. We're going to define his act as an act of taiva. When someone's Mechal Shabbos B'Farhesya, there we define his act as an act of kfir. That's what Ramesh says. So listen to Ramesh. He says, now, im came b'poi, sheyodua, that everybody knows, sheroiv Mechalei Shabbos, that most Mechalei Shabbos in the United States of America, 1950, b'shvil Taivas HaMomen, they do it because of Taivas Momen. V'yesh harbe shaholchem l'beis HaKnesses lehispala. There are many, Ramesh said, who used to go to shul Shabbos morning, v'achakach holchem l'beis Mischarim, and then afterwards they would go to work. Efsher, gam shul b'farhesya needing kibitzina. How can you say he's a kaifer? He went to shul in the morning. He went to shul. Elamai is about tithing. He couldn't overcome the nisayon of not working on Shabbos, which was very, very rampant in the first part of the 20th century, United States of America. That's what Moshe is saying. That obviously is what's going on over here. You can tell me he's a kaifer. If he's a kaifer, why did he go to shul in the morning? He would have stayed in bed. So the fact he would have slept in. So the fact that he got up early in the morning, he went, even if he drove to shul, but at the end of the day, he went to shul. That's the point. So it says Moshe, he believed that the Mechalei Shabbos, listen to a koyach etera from Moshe, that the Mechalei Shabbos B'Farhesya in the United States had a din of a Mechalei Shabbos B'Tzina. Because the taich of a Mechal Shabbos B'Farhesya, the reason he's treated so stringently in halacha is because we look at what he did as an act of kvira. And you can't tell me that this person who drove to Shul Shabbos is a kaifer. Because if he's a kaifer, he's very misguided, and he's an Amaretz perhaps, but at the same time, you can't tell me he's a kaifer. He went to Shul. He's not a kaifer. He went to Daven. He said Shemona Esrei. He said Kaddish. He said Kedusha. So at the end of the day, a kaifer is an ish. Memeli is viewed as a Mechal Shabbos B'Tzina. We view what he's doing as doing because of taiva that he can't overcome. A Mechal Shabbos B'Tzina is not Ka'evet Avodah Zarah. So Ramesh said two reasons why I disagree, and I think at Al Kaponim, as it relates to the Shaila that this Rav in Rock Island had sent Ramesh is not a real Shaila, is not a problem. He said, number one, because I disagree with the whole halacha of the Mishabru. To me, the Mishabru is psak, which he refers to as Das Rabbi Seinu Achreinim. He says it's Tamuah. It's Bar Ladina, not like that, says Ramosha. And number two, he says, as it relates to this specific question, I think the Mechal Shabbos B'Farhesya today, most of them are Mechal Shabbos B'Tzina. So what's the bottom line? So Ramosha said, Nimtza Shaladina Ein L'Paisloi. But a Baal Nefesh should be machmer. He doesn't say that, but that's essentially what Ramosha says. Ramosha says, I don't encourage it, and I think l'chatchila we should try to prevent it, but at the same time, at the very end, he says, Ach limchois biyad chazaka be'elu ayorishemanichem moisam lisa kapeim av she'en ruach hachamim noichem bizeh mistaber she'en mechuyavim yedidai. Beautiful tshuva. Either way, a little bit weiter. So, we spoke a lot about Beis Chanyai, a lot of technical, difficult cheshbon gemaras, not such an easy Amid Aleph, but Amid Beis, moves a little bit more smoothly. Zok the Mishnah, what exactly was Beis Chanya? So the Mishnah said that Kohanim that did avodah in Beis Chanya were not allowed to do avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. Ve'ein tzarich loymar, and it goes without say, and then the Mishnah says it, that if Kohen did avodah in the Beis Hamikdash Zara, that he would not be allowed to do avodah now in the Beis Hamikdash. With the Kohen tzarich loymar davar achar, for the fact that the Mishnah said that it's poshut, that if a kohen did avodah in a beis avodah zarah, meaning it's worse to do avodah in beis avodah zarah than to do avodah beis chanya. Mechal beis chanya, lav beis chavim. You see clear beis chanya is not a beis avodah zarah. Zok the Gemara, Tanya command Amar beis chanya, lav beis chavim. That's the case. We have a mishnah, a stam mishnah like the man the Amar that holds beis chanya wasn't avodah zarah. Tanya, we learned to the Bryce Oishel. So Shana Shemei Shimon HaTzadik, the yid that Shimon HaTzadik passed away. Amar lehem, so Shimon HaTzadik told his chevra Shana Zuhumes. He said he's going to die this year. How do you know? He said, Kol Yom Kippurim, every Yom Kippur. Shimon HaTzadik was the Kohen Gadol for 40 years, in the beginning of Bayis Sheni. So every Yom Kippur, when he would go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, this Dami Lizokin Echad, an old man would come, Lavish Levanim, he'd be wearing white clothing, V'nesativ Levanim, he'd be wearing a white talus, V'nichnasimi, he would come into the Kodesh HaKadoshim with me, V'yatzaimi, and he would leave with me. Shanazu, this year, Dami Lizokin Echad, again there was a Zokin that came with me, but he was Lavish Chayrim. He was not dressed in white, he was dressed in black. Said Shimon HaTzadik, and Shimon HaTzadik took that as an omen, as a bad sign, and he believed that meant that this was the last time he was going to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Thus he turns to his Talmidim and he told him, Shana Zuhume. Says the Gemara, after Sukkot, Chol Shivas Yomim, Shimon HaTzadik became sick. He was sick for 7 days, and he passed away. And after Shimon HaTzadik died, the Kohanim stopped using the Shem HaMeforish in the Beis HaMikdash. So the Kohen Gadol used to use the Shem HaMeforish in the Beis HaMikdash, but after Shimon HaTzadik passed away, for the remainder of Bayis Sheni, it was no longer used. Incidentally, every 3 words in this brisa has Tile raid. So we'll have to see whether or not we can get to some of this. Either way, B'shas P'tir Rasai, where Shimon HaTzadik passed away, literally as he was dying, Amal Lehem, so he turns to his children and he says, Chanyoy b'ni yisham nishtachti. I want my son Chanyoy to be the next Kohen Gadol. This kind of a Shimi. Now Shimon HaTzadik had an older brother whose name was an older son, Shimi. He was 2.5 years older than Chanya, and he got jealous. My younger brother is going to be the one that's the Kohen Gadol. Amaloi. So Shimi goes to Chanya, the younger brother, who's going to be the Kohen Gadol. Now Shimon HaTzadik just passed away. He says, let me teach you the Seder Avodah. Taisus Medayik. It sounds like Chanya didn't know how to do the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. If he didn't know how to do Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, so he wasn't a Memale Makam Avodah. Doesn't sound like he was a worthy candidate. Meaning Kuna Gedayla goes over B'Yerusha, just like all Siraros go over B'Yerusha. But there is a condition, you have to be worthy. L'chura, if a Kohen Gadol doesn't know how to do the Avodah, certainly sounds like maybe he wasn't worthy. It's Taisus Kasha. But either way, so Chanya is going to be the next Kohen Gadol based on the Mitzvah L'Kayim Divrei HaMeis, the dying words of Shimon HaTzadik. Shimi, the older brother, is now going to explain to the younger brother exactly how you're supposed to do the Avodah. This is what he told him. He told him that the first time you do the Avodah, you're supposed to wear a woman's blouse. And you're supposed to wear a belt that women used to wear. So Chanya didn't know any better. He puts on these women clothing, and he goes to do the Avodah. As Chanya is standing by the Mizbeach, he's about to do the Avodah, so Shimi turns to the Kohanim, and he says, look who my brother is. Take a look at who the next Kohen Gadol is about to be. My brother Chanya is wearing women's clothing. You know why? Because he told his wife, Ahuvasa, that if he ever is Zoicha to be the Kohen Gadol, he's going to dedicate the first Avodah to her. And the way he's going to do it is by wearing her clothing. It says the Gemara, with the Gehanim or that, they couldn't believe what happened. So they wanted to kill Chanya. So he started running, and there was a chase. He had to run so far, he literally ended up in Egypt, crossed the border. He ended up in Alexandria. And when he got to Alexandria, he built him his all of the Shuma and he started bringing karbanos on that Mizbeach l'shem avodah zarah. When the Chachamim heard about it, they said, someone who started off with good intentions, and he really wanted to do avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. You see, look what ended up happening. Someone that goes with the intention of doing avodah. So you see, it's not so pasha to make someone and take someone away from doing the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. Divri Rab Meir. Al Kopanim, this was Rab Meir's version of what happened, or the history of exactly how Beis Chanya was started. It started because Shimon HaTzadik on his deathbed, decided that his younger son Chanyai should be the next Kohen Gadol. The older son, Shimi, was jealous. Chanyai apparently didn't really know that much about how you're supposed to do the Avodah, which Taisus says is tzarichin, but those are the facts. So Shimi now goes up to Chanyai and tells Chanyai, now you're supposed to do the Avodah the first time, you're supposed to wear women's clothing. He listens. Shimi tells the Kohanim that the reason he did it, it's not true, says the reason he did it is because he made a promise to his wife that he's going to dedicate the first Avodah for her. They wanted to kill Chanyai. Chanyai had no choice but to flee, literally to run for his life. He ends up in Alexandria. He builds a Beis Avodah Zarah. That was Beis Chanyai. Lahalacha, what Rameir said was that Beis Chanyai was a Beis Avodah Zarah. Rabbi Yehuda told Rameir, "Loi kachayim mais." I'll tell you what the story really was. Elo loi kibul of Chanyai. Really, Chanyai was not the Kohen Gadol. Shayashimi achav gadol Menachos sharam mechza. Meaning Chanyai told his father, "I can't be makabel. I can't take it upon myself to be the Kohen Gadol. I have an older brother. My older brother Shimi. He's the one that's supposed to be the next Kohen Gadol." Afa Pikein, and despite the fact that Chanyai walked away, neskana by Chanyai b'Shimi achiv, but Chanyai was still jealous. There was a little part of him that sipped. At the end of the day, he did want to be the Kohen Gadol, even though he deferred for his older brother. So Chanyai told Shimi, let me teach you the Avodah. So it was Shimi that was the Kohen Gadol. He's the one that's going to do the Avodah. The same exact story. He puts on women's clothing. So Chanyai now told the Kohanim, take a look at the neder that my brother Shimi made. And the Kohanim wanted to kill him. What happened was, but Shimi told the Kohanim, he says, no, that's not really what happened. What happened was, I didn't know how to do the Avodah. Chanyai was the one that set it up. And they believed Shimi. They believed that it was a setup. Now, Bikshul Harikas Chanyai. They wanted to kill Chanyai. Rotz mipneihem. Chanyai had to run away. V'ratzu acharav. Ratzu lebeis hamelech. V'ratzu kala acharav. Kala roya oisei oimer zehu. So a very dramatic chase. But at the end of the day, he ended up Halach Alexandria Shal Mitzrayim. Ubana Shal Mizbeach. Chanyai built a Mizbeach. V'hela olav l'shem shamayim. And he brought karbanis there, not l'shem avodah zarah. L'shem shenem as the pasuk said. V'hei be'ei mahu yim Mizbeach l'Hashem b'seicheretz Mitzrayim matzei ve'etzel gvul. And he based it on a pasuk, on a vur that Yeshaya Hanavi had said, Perik Yutes, Pasuk Yutes, 1919. Either way, a pasuk where Yeshaya seems to prophesize about some mizbeach that's going to exist in Mitzrayim. Chanyai took that as a sign that the time had come to establish that nevuah. This was done l'shem shemayim. This was done in observance of a nevuah of Yeshaya. The bottom line is, we'll talk more about this tomorrow, but they come and so there was a sensitivity over it. It's not so posh to remove a person from doing the avodah. But the bottom line is there were two differences in Rameir's version of the story and Rabbi Yehuda's version of the story. One was more technical, one was more halachic. The technical aspect of it was, who is the one that was wearing the woman's clothing doing the avodah day one after Ptirasa Shel Shimon HaTzadik? According to Rameir, it was Chanyai who was set up by his brother Shimi. Chanyai had to run away because of the rechilos of Shimi. He ends up in Alexandria. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it was Shimi that was doing the avodah. But Shimi told the Kohanim that he was set up by Chanyai. The Kohanim believed Shimi, and Chanyai had to run away not for doing the avodah, but for setting up Shimi. But the more halachic nafkamina was, at the end of the day, was Beis Chanyai a Beis Avodah Zarah, or was Beis Chanyai a bias that was brought l'shem shemayim? According to Rameir, it was a Beis Avodah Zarah. According to Rabbi Yehuda, when Chanyai established his Beis Chanyai in Alexandria, he was coming to Mekayim the pasuk v'hoya b'yoyim hahu yeh mizbeach l'Hashem b'sleich eretz Mitzrayim u'matzei va'etzel gvula. He was doing this in observance. It was something that was done l'shem shemayim. So going back to the beginning of the Amud, an argument Mishnah, the Mishnah says that a kohen that did avoid the Beis Chanyai can't do avoid in the Beis Hamikdash. Ve'ein tzarich loymar. And that's pashit, that if he does avoid in the Beis Avodah Zarah, he now can't do avoid in the Beis Hamikdash. Michlal says the Gemara that Beis Chanyai wasn't a Beis Avodah Zarah. Tanya, this Tam Mishnah then is Commando Amar, Beis Chanyai lav avodas kechavim. Who was the one that held Beis Chanyai's lav avodas kechavim? Rabbi Yehuda. So even though Stam Mishnah is always Rameir, this Stam Mishnah that held that Beis Chanyai was not a Beis Avodah Zarah is not going according to Rameir. This Stam Mishnah is actually going according to Rabbi Yehuda. So there's a lot to talk about. but it got late early. But just the one thing that we'll take out from here, and then we'll pick it up in Metz Hashem on the next daf, and that is that you see the Yerida, the unbelievable spiritual decline that happened after Shimon HaTzadik passed away. We all know the Gemara Masechtas Yuma Daf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. We always refer to it. The Gemara says that for the 40 Shimon HaTzadik, the 40 years that Shimon HaTzadik was the Kohen Gadol, a lot of nisim took place in the Beis Hamikdash. The Goyrel on Yom Kippur was always oiling to the right. The one that was Lashem ended up in the right hand of the Kohen Gadol. You had the Ner Maravi, the Loshin Shel Zahiris turned white. You had there was when they used to divide the lechem aponim and the shtei lechem, there was enough for all the kohanim to go around. After Shimon HaTzadik passed away, all of that changed. So the 40 years of Shimon HaTzadik were years of kedusha v'tahira. After Shimon HaTzadik passed away, there was an unbelievable spiritual decline. You see from here how far that went. Imagine Shimon HaTzadik for 40 years. This is b'kedusha v'tahira. He goes into the kodesh hakedashim. This damali zokin echad. He's lavish levanim, v'nesatip levanim. This unbelievable maimed that's going on every single year, every single day in the Beis Hamikdash. Shimon HaTzadik passes away. The very next day, one brother is jealous of the other brother. He sets him up. How does he set him up? The Kohen Gadol is doing the avodah now, wearing women's clothing. And what they're discussing, the hack in the Beis Hamikdash is that he made a neder that he's going to dedicate the first, not for Hashem, he's going to dedicate the first avodah for his wife. And the way he's doing that is by wearing women's clothing. It's lo yu'umin ki yisupar. This is the first day after the P'tir of Shimon HaTzadik. How did it spiral so quickly? And for that, we need the rest of the story. And for that, we're going to have to wait until the next daf.